The Mazda RX-8 is one of those cars that everybody coveted when it came out, and even now when it is an affordable sports car that you can go out and buy. But so many people avoid them simply because they are deemed an unreliable headache to deal with. And today, I'm going to tell you why you should reconsider this car, because it is not as bad as you think. Well, Tim, thank you for letting me bring this out, and welcome to TFL Classics.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I first wanted to point out, when you handed me the key, I think it's really interesting. It's kind of like this little credit card. I think the intention back then was that you could like fit this in your wallet. And then a lot of people will think, if you have such a thin little key like this, well, how do you get your extra key or your spare key, right? But they built that in too, so I think it's kind of a cool little thing that that they did back then. But just exiting a parking lot here and making sure I don't scrape your car. Now, I've actually driven one of these once before, very briefly, but I didn't get to have any fun with it. I was just kind of transporting it. It was someone else's car, and so I, drove it very respectfully and didn't do anything crazy to it. But you were telling me that these kinds of cars, they really like to be wrung out, right?
Absolutely. So these cars, they want you to get into it. They want you to take it to red line, and they want to go from like here to New York City in red line. And then what they want is they want to turn around and do it again.
Yeah. Well, I know that when an engine is cold, you don't necessarily want to do that. So we'll let it warm up first, and maybe I'll get it to close to red line once for you. But I don't want to beat up your car too much.
Okay.
Here. Right. Boy, it is a really unique sound. I mean, being such a small engine at only 1.3 liters, would you say this is putting out the 238 horsepower from factory, or is it a little bit more?
It's going to be around the same. I haven't really done any modifications to it that would actually increase its horsepower.
Okay.
In fact, with this Reconsider engine, it's actually a high compression rotary. So aside from the RX-7 or the RX 2s and RX-3s that were out there, this is actually supposed to be a 10.1 or 10-to-1 compression ratio on these rotors. So, and with the Reconsider, it's actually called a multi-side port. So it's not a peripheral exhaust. It's actually, the exhaust comes out the side on the housings. So with that being said, it's very difficult to get any major performance increases out of this engine.
Interesting. Yeah. I know at least the RX-7s, turbo was king when it came to those, but these, can you force induct these?
Yes, you can. There used to be kits available for them. They're mostly discontinued now. However, you can still find them. They don't like to go much over. Oh yeah.
Ooh, that's a good sound. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't have like a throw you in the back of your seat kind of torque feel to it, but I don't think that's really the point of these cars. I mean, they're more horsepower than they are torque, so it doesn't give you that like push back in the seat. But it is one of those cars that before you realize it, you're moving at a pretty good clip. And I mean, I got up to 60 miles an hour in that little stretch right there, so it does pick up and move quick enough. But I think the key to these is like the handling, right? Because
Absolutely.
They're so lightweight. This is the kind of car that you can take around a mountain road and in the twisties and just have an absolute blast with it. And unlike the Miata, you can bring 2 more friends with you.
Yeah. They're just a very well-balanced car.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole idea of the RX, right, was to be Mazda's halo car when they came out with the RX-7, right? It's supposed to be their top performing type of car, especially when you're talking about like the last generation RX-7. Now that was discontinued in '95, and this guy didn't actually come out until 2003, I believe, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And so there was a little bit of gap there where we didn't have a Mazda rotary powered car, at least here in the States. But the late 90s, oddly enough, saw kind of a resurgence with the popularity of Japanese import performance cars. And that kind of culminated with the very first Fast and Furious that came out in 2001. And I mean, Fast and the Furious came out because of the popularity of Japanese import cars at that time, right?
You know, interesting fact. I watched Tokyo Drift the other day, and I noticed one of the characters in there actually drove an RX-8.
Oh, nice! I missed that. I'm gonna do it one more time if that's okay.
Bring it out. Bring it out.
Let's get it up. And now this has a 9,000 RPM redline. Woo! Boy, that really gets loud there at the high end of that redline. That's pretty nice, actually. Yeah, we got up a little over 60 miles an hour there, and
in second gear.
Yeah, in second. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. That's pretty cool. You can get all the way up over 60 miles an hour in second gear because that RPM redline is so high.
You know, that's another interesting thing I found about this car is that you actually have a usable first gear.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Mazda really wanted to show off the fact that this is a rotary engine, so much so that they put the shape of the rotor on the front bumper, the rear bumper, they put it on the hood, they put a little one there in the headlights, and then if you look closely on the wheels, you have all these rotors going all the way around, and then hopping into the interior, if you look at the headrest, or just below the headrest, the little cutout there is a rotor shape, and then the shift knob, the very top of it, is the shape of a rotor as well. If you think about performance cars of the age, this is actually a pretty usable back seat for an adult. Now, I wouldn't want to be here for a long period of time, but for short trips, it's actually fairly comfortable. Now let's talk about the engine. This is a 1.3 liter twin rotor rotary engine, otherwise known as the Wankel engine because of the man that invented it. This being a 2008 model, it puts out about 238 horsepower from the factory. Now, earlier versions have a lot less. And as I mentioned earlier, this is the main culprit that has a pain point for a lot of people because they are deemed unreliable, but I think they're just a little bit more maintenance heavy. And Tim, tell me a little bit about your ownership experience and what it has been like to own this car with this motor in it. And has it been super unreliable for you, or what's it been like?
In fact, I've not had any unreliable issues, because if you take care of these engines properly, you know, let's say like a normal car says oil change at 3,000 miles, right? If you can go 5,000 miles, the engine doesn't really care.
Right.
But since this engine actually relies on the engine oil for lubrication, you have to be spot on with your maintenance. So if it says 3,000 miles in the owner's manual, you should be doing it at 3,000 miles.
Sure.
And I think that's where the misconception lies.
And do these consume a little bit of oil, so you have to top up between oil changes? Or is it just something that you just do regular oil changes and you can live with it the way it is?
So Mazda, when they design these engines, they pull the engine oil from the crankcase to lubricate the apex seals of the rotors. They designed it in such a way that it should not be able to top off oil in between oil changes. So if you do your oil at 3,000 miles, you've probably consumed maybe a half a quart to a quart of oil between the oil changes,
Sure.
which has been unaccounted for with the design of the engine.
And now I see that you've done a few modifications in here. Can you kind of go over what you've done and why you chose to do these mods?
Absolutely. So one of the first mods that I've done, and I will tell you right now, I changed out the ignition coils. One of the big reasons I changed those out is because the duty cycle is a lot greater on these engines than a factory engine, so you do not want to use cheap ignition coils. You want to stick with the factory, or you want to go with a high performance ignition coil, which is what I've done here. They're Black Halo Racing Edition. I've stuck with the factory wires, NGK, and the factory plugs from NGK because the manufacturer knows best in that place.
Okay.
Another one is I moved to a cold air intake, which a lot of people do for added performance or whatever.
Sure.
And this is true cold air intake. It brings it right through and then pulls the air in through a K&N filter underneath the front bumper.
Yeah, I kind of like that. A lot of people, when they do an intake modification, they do what I like to call a hot air intake, where they just have the thing sitting right out here by the engine, so it's just drawing hot air into the engine, almost worse than what the factory came from.
Right.
But this I can kind of get behind because it is, as you said, a true cold air intake, so you're actually getting a good performance boost from it. Now, what is this guy here?
This is going to be the coolant overflow reservoir.
Okay.
Since the age of the vehicle, this is a 2008, they've been prone to breaking. So, I mean, it's not uncommon for any car of this age, really.
Sure.
So I went to an aluminum one. It can handle the pressures a little bit better, and it can also, it'll last. It's more durable. As you can see also, I've removed the air box, which used to fit right in this area here.
Okay.
Just to make some added room. And then the battery, I've relocated the battery to the trunk as well.
Okay.
One of the reasons I did that was because I wanted to allow for air to flow through off the radiator a little bit better.
Makes sense. And then what is this guy here? Is this for oil?
Absolutely. So one of the things is in my opinion, crankcase oil is never 100% clean, no matter how much you filter it. So what I've done here is I've put on something called a Sohan adapter. What that does is that blocks off the oil from the oil crankcase, and it feeds from a separate reservoir. So what I'm doing now is I've got Idemitsu 2-stroke oil in that reservoir, so I'm injecting clean, smokeless 2-stroke oil into the rotor housings to make sure that everything stays clean, everything stays lubricated, and keeps it running well.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you for giving me a little tour here underneath. And the one thing that stands out to me is just how far back this engine is pushed. So much so that it is actually, I think, behind the front axle. So this is kind of like a mid front engine car. And from what I have read, that this pretty much gave it an almost perfect 50-50 weight distribution. So I'm sure that putting it that far back really ups the handling on this car.
Oh, absolutely. This thing's a total blast to drive.
Well guys, it has been a blast finally getting to tour one of these RX-8s. To be honest, I've always really been interested in them, but I've never had the opportunity to really take a deep dive into one. And seeing as how Tim has owned this now for a little while, and it's been pretty reliable for him, I'm gonna be out on the hunt for one just for myself. But I wanna know what you guys think in the comments section below. Did these get a bad reputation for the wrong reasons, or do they deserve the bad reputation that they have? Either way, let me know in those comments below. Hit the thumbs up if you like this video, and please, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. This has been Brendan, Case Behind the Camera, and big thanks to Tim, the owner. Take care, guys.